So I'll go through our asks and a little bit of background on that. You're probably aware we've had this discussion a little bit in the past, but I want to go through a few backup information on relative to these requests. I'll start with the additional planner. I hope you can see that all right. So I've shown you a little table here. This is kind of being presented as an additional ask, but really in reality, what we're trying to do is get back to our long-term staffing level for planners in community development. As long as I've been here, when I started nearly 20 years ago, we'd always had 5 planners. That was changed in end of 2012, beginning of 2013, as part of a restructuring that put community development, eliminated community development as its own entity as far as a department, and put us under Public Works. It's been a great marriage. Richard and his staff have been very supportive. But I guess life as we know it and our workload has been the same, if not improving. Let me just go through this chart a little bit. So I've shown the last 4 years we had 5 full-time planners, 2009 through 2012, and I've shown, I'm gonna look at my glasses here too. I've shown the first column, actually the first column shows the population, and it's, we have lost some unincorporated population. In 2010, the only years I put were the ones that we had census numbers. So 2010, the unincorporated population was 10,000, just over 10,000. We had 5 planners all through those 3 years. As you can see, our zone clearances averaged about 96. Our single-family dwelling permits, which kind of is a good measuring stick of the demand of people wanting to build homes and all the work that's associated with getting a lot eligible in the county. It's a much different animal than it is in the city. 17 and a half per year, so a couple hundred building permits. I put up our rezone applications. Those are our more advanced land use applications to kind of give you an idea of what those were looking like. And then our subdivisions in progress. That number represents at any given point in time, that's how many subdivision applications our staff is working with to get through the approval process, which can be quite a process and quite involved. So those first 4 years on there are our last years with 5 planners. In 2013, we lost 2 planners. So we went from 5 to 3. The county commission at the time asked us to give it a chance, give it a try, and see how it goes. As you can see, the trends were up over the next, and I should say they did give us one planner back mid-2014. So that got us up to 4. As you can see there, our zone clearance numbers have been on the increase, 147% of when we had 5 houses, building permits. Our rezone applications have recently had quite an uptick, and then our subdivisions have had quite an uptick. So I guess what I'm showing there is the staffing decreased while the workload has continued to increase. Now, one other thing I want to point out relative to the population. So the population in the county is always going to be going down. In 2000, the census number, our last census before 2010, the population was 11,164. And so between 2000 and 2010, it went down about 11%. Between 2010 and 2017, 2017 is just an estimate. It's a census estimate. We'll get that actual number here next year. It went down 87%. So it's somewhat of a constant loss there. But as you can see, that doesn't equate with our application load and our permit load going down. I think a lot of that has to do with the niche market or the niche housing of the county. People still want to live out in the county for a number of reasons, because of the environment and the setting. Also, the overall population, as we're very much aware of in the county, is just exploding. And that equals work in the county. There's certain uses that are associated with the overall population that are increasing. Of gravel pits, the need for construction material, cell phone towers, recreational uses, more population. People want to be out in the county. A lot of city residents own property out in the county, and they want to do certain things with their property that, even though they are a city resident. So as you can see, it's the workload is not correlating to a decreasing population. So let me get into a couple other things here. This just is a snapshot of some measurables, and we have other measurables. We have business license applications, we have ag protection applications, but this is just a small portion of what community development does. Many of the things we do, and most of our time is spent helping the public and helping property owners. And a lot of times those are not necessarily things that we receive an application for. We're taking phone calls, we're having people come in the counter, we're trying to work with people through problems with their property to get them to a point where they can get a permit and use their property the way they want. It takes a lot of time, and I think we want to do that, and I think you guys support us doing that. We want to make sure that we're spending the time to help people with their land use questions and desires. So let me get into...
Can I ask you a few questions back on that chart still?
Yeah, let's go back here.
So on the rezone applications, this is not applications, this is in acres.
Acres, yes.
So you could have, a large rezone in an area. So how many applications?
That's hard to measure. So for example, that 2009 application or number, most of that, not all of it, was a huge project we did out in Alberta, the church. It was one property owner, but it was thousands of properties.
Right.
That still represents a lot of work because you have to research the properties, you have to do notification. It expands as the application gets bigger. That's why I tried to show the acreage. I would say in 2017 and 2018, the bulk of those were several, 1 or 2 or 3 applications. Again, those are months of work. Most years, including the years with the big ones, it's probably half a dozen a year of rezone applications, which those carry out months, each of them, as you're well aware.
Okay. And then on the staffing plan, was part of that 5, that when it went from 5 down to 3, was there ties with administrative? Was there dual functions that were going on there?
No.
Planners?
Those were, well...
Director?
Yes.
The director was a planner as well?
Yes, he was. It was, my predecessor was a director. He took care of the administrative portions of community development, and then he also covered planning functions such as the Planning Commission and other land use applications. That position went away, and I absorbed it, to be quite frank, and my duties doubled. Richard and his staff have been great and have tried to absorb that somewhat, but I was doing the Board of Adjustment and supervising the planners. I continued to do that, and I absorbed Mr. Mendenhall's duties. Right. Any other questions on this site, on this question? Or, okay, just a couple of graphs here. I hope you can see those all right. Those are kind of rough. This is just basically showing the permit trends, and I'll break them down a little more. Basically that data that we had on that chart. We've got a great office specialist that's a BYU student who's great at these graphs and numbers. So what I want to show basically here is the blue line is our staff trend, and long term in this period, 2009 to present, we're trending down with our staffing, and every other metric there, which are our permits, are trending up. And so I think that's a situation that is probably not sustainable. Again, this is just the single family dwelling trend, just to give you kind of a visual there. Subdivision, zone clearances, back to that. So a couple other quick things. So having an extra planner, in addition to obviously helping address the increased load, Right now, that's got to be done anyway, and so all of our planning staff are pitching in doing it by having an extra planner, getting our back to our 5. That'll free up time for our other staff to address more advanced planning studies. We'd like to be a little more proactive in some of our planning projects. Right now, we're really just trying to be reactive to the workload, but also the mandates. We have state and federal mandates that we have to address, and that way we can get on those quicker and more thoroughly. As you're aware, it seems like those coming down from the state seem to be on the increase. Sometimes they provide resources to help, other times they don't. Most times they don't. The resource management plan, the first version, they weren't gonna fund that, and then they went through that and provide some funding to help the counties get some help on there, because that was a huge project. So that would help our advanced, or our planning staff to be a little more proactive, and quite frankly, you just try and get to what's before you, and we address people that come in and want an application first, because those people are wanting to do it the right way, and we try and get through those as quickly as we can so we can get to everything else. But that being said, you feel like you're just going so fast that you hope you're not missing something, and I want to commend my staff. I think we've, with the resources we've had, we've been quick, and we've also been accurate. Since 2006, we're not perfect, but since 2006, we've only had 4 out of the thousands of land use applications that we make a decision on. We've had 4 formal alleged error complaints or applications. People saying, you made an error, I'm gonna file an application. And of those 4, 3 were upheld by the Board of Adjustment, meaning they felt the staff was correct in their decision, and 1 was withdrawn from by the applicant. So I think our staff is getting the right information out with limited resources, and I think they should be commended for that. Other community development, we have looked at ways of trying to be more efficient. We've gotten a lot of our record keeping and our file storage in a digital format, which has been very helpful to help us be more efficient. I think that's helped keep up with some of the pace, and I think going forward, it's been proven that and shown that 5 is really our staffing level that we need going forward. And I think that would suffice for a number of years, given the current land use trends that we have. Obviously, if land use trend or policies change in the county, and all of a sudden we're issuing thousands of homes out in the county, then that would change, and we'd have to readdress it at that time. But with continued increases, improvements in our efficiency and technology, I think going forward, 5 has proven to be the correct staffing level for our planning staff. Our building division, I think, is appropriately staffed. Our administrative office support, I think we're appropriate there. We have lost number positions over the years in those too. We've lost an inspector a number of years ago, and we lost a full-time administrative support position. But I think that we've been able to, I think those are appropriately staffed at our current level. We've been able to get an office specialist, a time-limited position, to help absorb that loss of that full-time, and I think that's seemed to definitely help and be adequate. Last thing I want to mention is a little bit on the funding sources. We've mentioned this is funded through Service Area 8. In the last 5 years, 6 years, as we've gone through our projected revenue, fee revenue, this is supplemented by fees that we collect through our application process. We project a revenue for the year, and then to balance our budget at the end of the year, anything that the fees don't, which is the majority of it, is covered by the service area money. And since 2014, that's as far back as I went, but I think it continues, we've collected a surplus fee revenue, meaning that would require that much less being drawn from the service area money to balance our budget. 2014, we collected a $50,000 above our projected fee revenue. 2015, 26,000. 2016, 136,000. 2017, 15,000. 2018, 16,000. It's for an average of those years of about $50,000 a year that we're bringing in above our projected revenues. So we've been,
Okay.
and then of course expenses. You know, we haven't been a deficit. You know, we've always had a little bit of extra at the end of the year that helps balance that. So.
Okay, thank you. Deneen, if you can also go over service area 8, just on a financial basis.
Well, just to clarify, Service Area 8, another funding source for it is, it's another funding source for roads. So, I mean, there is enough funding for these types of requests, but I also don't know how much the board would want to use for road projects. That's a possibility, but there is enough money for those requests.
So what is the current fund balance in 8?
It is, sorry, $1.7 million.
And the total revenue that's coming in through community development services?
So 2018 actual was 900 and, oh, sorry, no, I need to back off. It was $287,000.
That was actual? And you
Actual
and
fees.
you budgeted for, you said it was about 16,000 less than that?
It was 2018, I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, 270.
I'm trying to match that with the number of employees and their benefits. That's not fully burdened there, is it?
So the balance comes from the property tax in Service Area 8.
Got it.
I think, Deneen, I think this service area tax was also reduced several years ago as
Yeah.
part of the similar process.
Quite a while ago. I might also mention with the fees, I think when I met with community development, it had been some time since that fee had been looked at. And if I remember correctly, part of the fee is supposed to cover like the attorney's time. I think that was a part of the fee. So there should be some portion of that fee that is coming to the general fund for those services.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that. We have, the last time we did an update of our fee schedule was 2015. That's something that we want to get to, one of our projects we want to look at. It's a balancing act because we obviously by mandate, you know, we can only cover what's required to provide that. That's each application is different, and some take days and others take a couple hours. We also want to encourage people to come in and get a zone clearance. We're only charging $30, and sometimes that takes several days, but I don't think we can charge $400 or $500 for someone to see if they can build a house, but we surely want to encourage people to do that so they don't sink their money into a property that may have some problems. We'll try and address that. So try and find that balance. You know, look at something hourly. That's kind of difficult too to administer. So, but that's the one thing we do want to look at. It's probably time to update our fee schedule also. Our building portion, which is a lot of our fees, that's, you know, established by adopted code. So it's not as much flexibility there on the land use side.
And Deneen, were you just saying that it's an available source for road projects?
Yes,
Or has that
right.
historically been a funding source for road projects?
Several years ago, it was used as a funding source.
But not in the last few
Right.
years?
Yes.
And I think there are some stipulations and conditions associated with what types of things those can be used for. It also is a source for stormwater, and some of those services have been utilized out of that fund. I think Richard's going to get to that.
Thank you.
Any other questions for? Thank you.
Mr. Price?
Bryce. Yeah, just like Bryce mentioned, the stormwater is another aspect that we are currently funding the stormwater employee out of Service Area 8. They're housed in engineering. That's where they function through and are supervised in. This is because of the stormwater rules and regulations that we're subject to that come from the EPA and the state. One of the things that we have with those, we have to have someone inspect the sites for their stormwater compliance on, is anything over an acre, Glenn? That anything that has over an acre of ground disturbed. So if you have a construction site, a subdivision that disturbs more than an acre, anything like that, a gravel pit, Those areas all have to have routine inspections done on them. And then they also have a requirement that we have to be out within, I think it's 24 hours of a storm event, and inspect all of those sites to make sure that their stormwater pollution reduction measures are functioning. So that kind of leads into the request in Service Area 8 under stormwater for the additional vehicle for the stormwater inspector. We currently don't have a vehicle for them. They're sharing a vehicle with our engineering tech in engineering. So sometimes that presents a conflict. They do have a lot of area they have to cover because it is county-wide, anything in the unincorporated county. We're not doing all of the sites in the county, but anything in unincorporated county that we have to deal with. But they are spread far and wide for the sites that are under that rule that we're having to abide by.
Is this a vehicle that they take home, or is this
No.
a vehicle that
This
stays
would be
here?
one, this would be one that would be at the shop, and they'd use it during the day, it would stay at the shop at night, so.
How many miles do they drive a year?
Do you know off the top of your head, how many miles?
I would imagine.
About 15,000.
So if the fire marshal gets a new vehicle, I think he's got one that he can give you.
Yeah, it's, okay. Sorry. Jeez, Kurt, I'd slap you. I'll just apologize. So, other questions on the, Service Area 8 monies, Bryce?
I'm sorry,
Oh,
I'm gonna
you're
take
good.
60 more seconds.
You're
I
good.
forgot my other two asks. They're somewhat minimal as far as amounts. We'd also like to change our staffing plan to, right now we have multiple planner twos. We'd like to change one of those planner twos to a senior planner, or planner 3 type of position. That would kind of get us into more of the model we had pre-2013 that has a designated chain of command in our planning position with a senior planner that could supervise our planner 2s and planner 1, in addition to maybe absorbing some of the board of adjustment duties. It also helps retain, as you're aware of some of the challenges we've had, retaining great employees. This would provide a position of leadership to help retain people. County spends a lot of time training and investing institutional knowledge into a planning staff. As I've mentioned before, a city planning job is a much different animal than a county planning job, and it takes a lot of training to get used to the county aspect of planning. And once we have someone trained, it's really beneficial to the county and to our staff to retain them and use that training and knowledge rather than start over. And so that would help solve that. And I think that number is not significant, but would certainly help in our retaining of great employees. Last one, I'd really like to see the county get to a kind of an online host for our land use ordinance, and I've been working with IT and the attorney's office. I think ideally we'd probably want to get the entire county code on having an online host or in-house and working with Patrick on that. Most jurisdictions are doing that. I don't know if we've heard of Muni Code or Sterling Codifiers. These online companies will host your ordinance, maintain it for you. It's really a useful tool for the public when doing searches. Right now we have a 300-page PDF document online for people to scroll through and find what they're looking for. And when I do research on other jurisdictions' ordinances and they have these services, it sure is useful. You can go right to where you can search, go right to the section you need and email from that. It's kind of similar to the way the state code's set up too. Of the 29 counties in the state, I think 17 or 18 are using that. The others, including Utah County, are the Paiutes and the Waynes and the Garfield counties of the world, which they may be limited in their resources, but I think that would be a great useful tool for the county to work towards. Our request is for the land use ordinance only. They can do that, but I think if we were able to work with the rest of the county code and get that on, I think those costs can be absorbed and dispersed a little more, and so I think it's more efficient to have the entire county code hosted by a company. So that's related to that third ask.
Is there an estimated cost for that?
Yeah, when we talked to one company, we looked at two to get some estimates, and we specifically talked to one, and it was I think about $10,000 the first year to get your ordinance reformatted, and then the ongoing, just to host it ongoing, I think it was $500 to $1,000 a year, and then whenever you amend a page, which the land use ordinance gets amended a lot more than the county code, they charge by the page. And so depending on, and it's, $15, $20 a page. And so, and I have a concern with that because sometimes you do a change and it has a trickle effect. And so all of a sudden we're doing one paragraph, but we're getting charged for 40 pages, and they have ways to kind of create the ordinance so you don't have that. They have some blanks pages or something to address that. So that would be my concern. But I think ongoing, you'd probably be looking at $5,000, $6,000 a year is my best estimate from these companies. So. We currently, some of our staff is doing that. Peggy's been great. Our land use ordinance is an old dinosaur of a word perfect document, and we've worked to get that into a Word document. And Peggy's spent hours and days trying to get that formatted, and every time we have a change, we have to make sure we don't screw up the formatting. And so it takes a lot of staff time to keep that up. And so that would be eliminated with using that and use it in more efficient measures, other needed functions. So, sorry about that. Thank you.
Maybe just jumping back into stormwater for just a minute. Glenn has some information from, I think it's Davis and Weaver counties on what they have on stormwater.
Okay, so maybe give a little history. In 2014, the county commission signed an implementation permit for an MS4, which we committed within 5 years we'd be fully functioning in that stormwater realm, which is to eliminate pollutants going into the rivers and streams in Utah. So to kind of give you an idea where we're at, 2014 you signed that. We sought for funding for those next few years, and finally in 2018 you funded a personnel or an individual we were able to staff. This last year we've spent a lot of time. That individual's worked 100% of his time on helping us come up with the code as well as standard operating procedures to come compliant. And as we look at that implementation, it was committed that we'd spend 1,948 man hours, which is one employee, towards stormwater. In addition to that, there was also the field inspections, which is 946 of those hours. As we started looking at the other counties and where they're functioning currently and how much money they're spending, I'll kind of read this off, and I thought this was interesting. Utah County, and I think we understand population and land size, is our current proposed budget would be $75,762. Weber County is their commitment in their MS4 permit is $151,000 towards stormwater. Summit County, which is actually got one personnel just like us, is spending $213,000 towards stormwater. Davis County, they've actually rolled it into their flood control because they actually have a whole division of personnel that's into flood control as well. They spend $4 million. That's also though wrapped into stormwater, so a little more difficult to bring that out. But I thought that was interesting and would be useful for you to see how the other counties are playing out and our mandate and obligations toward clean water. So.
You know that, I'm guessing we're talking about navigable waters somewhat when we're assessing those, right? Flowing streams.
So originally, yes, but it seems to be spreading more to anything from, anything that we discharge that reaches Utah Lake.
Okay.
So pretty much all of our waters here in Utah County.
I'd be curious on the comparison model because I think it's healthy to understand, but I would want to know, like with Summit County, with the significantly higher budget, if they're having the number of streams or sources that are entering the system versus the number we have, right? Do we have more waterways, more, entry points into the water system than Summit County does? Is that why their number's higher, or
Typically.
what's the comparison on the
Yeah,
workload?
typically what it is what determines that fee or that funding is how many construction sites there are. Again, Richard kind of touched on this. Any area of an acre and larger should be inspected or reviewed. Originally, the permit should be issued before the construction starts, and then once the construction starts, they do an initial inspection, and then after storm events. The challenging thing in Utah County is a little difficult. Most single-family dwelling sites now in Utah County meet that regulation because they typically are building them 5 acres, and they disturb that first acre, and that requires that permitting. So it kind of goes back in comparison with what Bryce shared with you a little earlier on the amount of building permits. But now you add building permits, subdivisions, and gravel pits, and other grading permits throughout the county that individual would be reviewing and inspecting after storms.
Okay, that helps me understand exactly what
Okay.
what we have to do.
And we're talking unincorporated, right?
Unincorporated.
Because the cities
Yep,
have
each-
their
yeah,
own stormwater.
Yeah, Utah County, the entities like Provo, Spanish, they all have their own stormwater divisions that are maintaining their own internal areas. So this is unincorporated area.
And then, I appreciate that there's always comparison with other counties and so forth, but the funding for that full-time, came from, if we have this funding for a full-time person, it'll take care of the needs that we have, even into the future to make sure that we're compliant. So,
Yep.
I mean, I know they do all kinds of other stuff, but from our analysis, when this was funded, it was that
Correct.
full-time person would be
Yep, and
enough for us.
that's what we're hoping to do. I think the thing that if you remember right, when we asked for this last year, it was for the vehicle as well, was one of our asks, so that this individual could meet those requirements. We still feel like we can do that with these things, hence we would still like to get that, so that individual would have the tools necessary to complete those tasks. So,
Maybe just adding one other thing with that, Glenn had mentioned that the communities in the county all take care of their own. We do a couple of things jointly with all of the cities in the county through our Stormwater Coalition. And our contribution is nominal. It's $300 a year. We have a requirement in the MS4 rules that we have to do public education and public outreach. That's one of the requirements that all of us collectively have. That's why the Stormwater Coalition was formed, probably 15 years or so ago. And we actually have an individual who works for the coalition who goes around and does classroom presentations to 4th grade classes throughout the county. That meets our public education and outreach requirements. They do some things like that meet all those rules and regulations. If we were to do that on our own, we'd have a significant cost. But, for $300 a year, we can't beat that cost, and we're doing it collectively with the cities, and we're based on a pro rata
That's why we
share.
see all those little trinkets.
That's why you see all the little trinkets. You got it.
Here I
Yep.
see that, I'm like, what in the world are we buying them?
Yeah, and we buy 20,000 of them or so, because
I know,
they
yeah.
go to so many 4th grade classes, but that's what they're for. And we have a very small portion of that, so. Okay, any other questions on Service Area 8, Community Development, Stormwater? Okay. I'll jump on to the next one here. So going into our administration division, it is a general fund division there. That is basically the front office and the finance side of the Public Works Department. We have a couple of requests that we're looking for there for some additional asks. One is a new copier. The copy machine that we have, copier printer out there, was purchased in 2012. It was anticipated for a 5-year life. We're now at year 7. It's getting tired. We're having numerous times where we're having service people have to come out and work on it. We would like to do that for the size and for the volume of copies and prints that we do. The machine's about 16,000 that we're looking for. So that would be the first ask in our administration budget. The second is some training and travel. That would be for Glenn and I to attend an Institute of Transportation Engineers conference that gets more into like signal operations, things like that on roadways. It's specific to transportation. as you're aware with the Canyon Road project, when we inherited that road from UDOT, we inherited some signals as well. There was an agreement with UDOT that gave us 5 years of signal maintenance from UDOT as part of that agreement. That runs out at the end of this year. So starting next year, we're gonna have to be managing and operating those signals on our own. We are looking at having an entity come in and actually do the physical work on the timing and things like that, but it's something that we really haven't been into in the past, and that's why we're looking for some additional training and traveler to try some of these other entities and see what we can learn about operating traffic signals and try to make sure we're doing that appropriately for the public.
As you look at your long-term road forecast, do you see additional roads in the county that'll be getting signals within the next 2 to 5 years?
I do. One of them is Woodland Hills Drive in the Salem area. We've got a signal that's planned up there with the addition of a new elementary school that's going in adjacent to Woodland Hills Drive. I think as we have other areas of the county that continue to grow and roads that are still county roads, I think we are gonna see additional signals come online for us in the future, so.
So I don't understand why we can't coordinate with the adjacent cities, because they have signals all over, they have to work in that realm constantly.
Well,
So why can't we just contract with them to maintain or?
The individual that we're looking at for the Canyon Road signals is actually the same individual that Pleasant Grove uses. They don't have anybody on staff that does it. They do it in-house, so, or not in-house, but they do it by contract with I think it's Pine Top Electric. So, that does the Pleasant Grove. That's who we're talking with to get an idea of how we can set up an agreement to do that. The bigger cities like Provo, they have their own signal team in-house. The smaller ones, though, typically don't have a staff of signal professionals.
Okay, so we're looking at hiring them.
Yes, that'd be a contract. It's not something that would warrant having a full-time individual on staff. It's electrical and electronic in nature, but it's different than what our electricians and our electronic specialists deal with. It's a different animal, so it doesn't really fit in their realm of expertise, so.
So then why would you need to go to a conference if we're gonna hire that out?
Because that's for the physical maintenance of the signal, but not the operation of it and how to place them, how to operate them, make sure they're timed right, things like that. That's more the engineering side of the world to do that, so.
You don't hire that out either? You'd be doing that in-house?
We just do that in-house is what we'd anticipate. So.
What would be your estimated cost savings to the county if we sent to this training over contracting every time we need some service like
I
that?
think we were looking, go ahead.
Maybe, Richard's, they're right, there's two different functions. The county, even if we contract out, will be the individual or the entity determining what those timings and that signal setup is, and that's maybe the challenge here. UDOT doesn't want to do that for us anymore. In the past, this last 4 or 5 years, we called UDOT and said, hey, that's out of timing, what should we set the timing at? We've got a complaint, this right-hand turn lane's backing up, what should we set it at? And you call the consultant up and you say, hey, I want you to move this setting to this. They don't want that liability. So typically, you've got to have some trained personnel that's willing to look at that and to determine that. And so right now, UDOT's been making those calls. And that's one of the difficult challenges. So we're looking at two different things. One is the physical work, which will be contracted out. The other one will be more of the looking at the functioning of how the signal will be working.
Commissioner, to get back to your question, we're asking for 4,000 for this training. My estimation would be if we're looking at having a consultant come in to do that work, we'd probably be in the $10,000 to $15,000 range to have them do the same thing, just because of the rates that they would be looking at. So that's kind of where we would look at on it. Other questions on administration?
So you need to have 2 people trained to do this?
I think it would be wise to, just so that we can kind of do a cross-check with each other, rather than have one of us that we may miss something, or if we're not always here, or we've seen in the last couple of years that we can be gone in a heartbeat, so I think it's good to have some backup there.
I'm having some hard time pulling up the actual baseline budget here. So I don't really have a lot of questions on, these are two simple new requests.
Mhm.
But, you know, I don't like to assume that the baseline budgets necessarily make sense. Do we have unfilled positions in your
Not in
baseline budget?
administration, no, not in administration.
And Deneen, what's the total budget in this account?
Hand that here, Gina. You might have to come interpret it.
While
for me.
she's pulling that up, Richard, the other question I have is, I don't know if the training and travel, because that's related to transportation, can that be funded out of the road account?
It probably could, yeah.
We could use them like the fourth quarter cent or something like that.
Yeah, I believe that money can be used for,
Where that's a more limited use fund,
Yeah.
I would recommend putting that in the
Yeah.
transportation fund.
we can do that.
So 2018 actual was 165,000. 2019 current budget is 196, and the 2020 budget's 359,000. The biggest increase looks like it's in vehicles.
Okay, so that's almost a doubling. You're saying it went from in the 100s in 18 and 19 to 365 in 2020?
359, right?
And that doesn't, is that a staffing plan change? or-
Sorry, let me back
Okay.
up. I was looking at materials and supplies. It's still the same increases. 2018 actual 433, 2019 adjusted is 502, and 2020 is 671,000. And the biggest increase was vehicles. In 2018, the actual was 108, 2019, the current budget's 140, and the 2020 budget's 300,000.
So, yeah, so we do see, and I've finally been able to pull this up. The employees have kind of stayed constant. Most of these line items are not significant. There is more than a doubling in the vehicle charge. Can you give us any context for that?
The biggest increase on that vehicle lease was recap depreciation. Richard received a new Tahoe this year to replace your Expedition, and Glenn is getting a new F-150 in the next month. And then also weeds, the noxious weed portion of weeds, meaning their tractor, comes out of administration general fund because it can't be a B road expense because it's used on more than just B roads. And they received a new tractor about May, I would say around May. And again, it was something that was fully recapped and depreciated before, but now, going into the new year, it will need to be recapped and depreciated, put on a schedule.
So the other two vehicles were not on a recap program?
They were, but for 2019, they had already met. They were at 0. So there wasn't any for 2019. That's why they were replaced this year. So then they will need to be put on recap depreciation, basically starting again. So the process starts over for 2020.
That's interesting. It doesn't seem like the purpose of the motor pool is serving its, because when you're just replacing vehicles that were already in the staffing plan and they weren't newly assigned vehicles, it doesn't seem to make sense to me that we would have this big of an increase.
The biggest time you would have an increase is if you change the life of the vehicle. So for example, if I have a vehicle that I put on a 10-year recap,
Yeah.
and in 10 years I go to replace it and I say, you know what, at 10 years it had 150,000 miles, we need to put it more on like a 5 or a 6 year, then you're going to see an increase in the amount of recap depreciation because you've shortened that useful life.
And is that what we did?
Yes, absolutely. We're
So
looking
that's what I was
more.
gonna say, that's bigger, that makes more sense for what we're doing, is we're changing the recap. We got a more expensive vehicle, we're recapping a smaller period of time.
Right, and actually the cost of the vehicle was about the same as what the other one was, but again, you're decreasing that time that we were expecting to have it. We're trying to, are you gonna hit on motor pool? We've had some discussion with the sheriff's office, a lot about the idea of where's that sweet spot to turn vehicles in to get the most value back. And we're finding that if we keep them more than 5 years, we're not making enough off of it to really make it worth having it. So the idea is, okay, the faster you rotate it out, where are we meeting as much as we can, income coming in versus expenses going out, so that if possible, we aren't really it's not costing us a ton to have a vehicle on site to use it at whatever time we need. So those are two vehicles, plus the tractor that, I think, if I remember right, the tractor was on a 20-year, and now we're looking at like a 12 for that. Because technology, every time we go to replace the mower that's attached to the tractor, then it doesn't have the right hookups, and then we're forced into replacing the tractor sooner. So we're trying to look at the replacement of both things so that they coincide at the same time.
So, at risk of confusing this even more,
You're okay.
theoretically, if this was being done to manage the cost in a better way, in other words, we're going to decrease our total cost of ownership because we're able to trade those cars out sooner and recapture a higher value, then that cost of ownership should not be increasing dramatically.
Where it would be
Even if we're
offset-
buying more cars and we're flipping them.
Correct. Where it would be offset is the income coming back on the sale of the fixed assets. So for example, I paid $30,000 for a vehicle, but then I turn around and sell it for $25,000 in 3 years. So the cost is gonna be offset at the time that I sell that vehicle.
See, and that's where, for me, if we're doing a longer recap and we're getting less on the sale, if we're doing a shorter recap, we're gonna get more on the sale. And so our recap can be smaller because we're doing it a shorter period of time.
Right.
And I mean, for instance, Salt Lake County got into trouble because they were purchasing vehicles and turning around and selling them within a year, and they were making money on the product, on the projects.
Right.
If we were to turn around just, for instance, and say, we're gonna recap it at a smaller amount, but we're gonna keep it for 3 years, because that's the sweet spot, or 5, whatever that number is, we could, in essence, be less on the recap and still, because of the resale, be able to purchase again another vehicle. And
Right.
so I'm wondering how we have such an increase.
So right
in-
now, our market, basically, we check market, we compare what is the vehicle costing us today versus what's it gonna cost us in 3 years. And our market's telling us that it's a 4.5% recap rate every year I keep that vehicle. We're hoping that that's gonna go down as we've now implemented this change of, you know what, let's keep them 3 years instead of 7 or 10. And then that should bring that recap value, I'm hoping, more like 2.5% a year, because I'm gonna be changing it out faster. But this is a new animal that now we're approaching, so what we're doing is basing it on market, and what it's always been in the past is 4.5% for every year that we keep it. And by doing that, when we go to replace that vehicle, there's adequate funds in the recap to do it without telling the department, hey, you're $10,000 short, or you're $20,000 short. You've gotta come up with that difference.
Yeah, that's where we don't wanna be, but what's your
Absolutely.
analysis on the resale?
Well, that's kind of a hard one. You wanna talk about resale a little bit?
Well, sure, I'll talk about. What we're seeing, and we have the opportunity, we've met with a lot of, I'll say, private entities over the last little while to talk to them. And it goes kind of, and I hate to say against, but maybe against practice of what the county has done in the past, and that is buy the cheapest rig we can buy and run it till the wheels fall off type thing. As we've met with these different entities, one Forest Service, also some private entities as well, what they're telling us would be the more appropriate and better program is to buy a little nicer vehicle, which is more cost up front, but they get a better a higher resale because of the way we can buy them. And sell them before we run them to the 100,000 type miles. So again, I wish we had a baseline. So we're doing this on about a dozen vehicles, trying this out to see what we can save for the county in the future. But reality is all we have is the past and what we've been talking to this private entity in the Forest Service, what they've been doing. Forest Service typically buys, for instance, and this is what they're doing. I don't know that's the perfect animal for us, but when I talk to them, they buy 3/4 ton to 1 ton pickup trucks and put everybody in that, and they drive them for about 2 years, because that's about where they get 60,000 miles on it, and then they sell them off. When I was talking to some of the private entities, they look at the bigger rigs and the nicer rigs, and they're going for 1 to 2 years as well. What isn't taking into cost is setup. We also have the lighting of a lot of these vehicles that have lighting because of safety features. There's still cost there, so if we were selling them too quick, then you're also resetting up those vehicles every time. So when we sat down and put together the figures, we felt like that for us, a good window would be a 5-year mark. And so that's what we're gonna try and do and see if that would change the value and maybe bring a better buck to the public.
And so that 5 years based off of,
Mileage, as well as, setup cost and sell of the vehicle. That, what we anticipate, yeah, so.
Maybe one thing that you're not seeing in these numbers right here, and Deneen, correct me if I'm wrong on this. The internal service fund lease amount does not reflect the resale of the vehicles. That goes back into the general fund. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Well, I understand it.
Or whichever fund purchased the vehicle.
Right, but it's not reflected in these numbers here. So all you see is the purchase side of it and on these numbers, not the resale side of it. Correct? Okay. Yep.
Sorry, not the purchase,
Well,
the cost.
you'd have the purchase and the recap and things like that.
One clarification, we're looking at different years for every division and department, so 5 years with just these two vehicles specifically.
Right.
The other departments and that, we're trying to look at the animal individually and not so much just overall, this is what we're gonna make everything fit, because that's what's been done in the past. We're trying to look at what is the useful life of that vehicle, how many miles are they putting on it, what are they doing with it, to try and optimize each vehicle, so.
And some of the specialized vehicles, like a bucket truck, for instance, we have that for our fiber optics and for our buildings crew. That's a very specialized vehicle. It doesn't make a lot of sense to trade it out very often. Doesn't get a lot of miles, but it's one that we need to have. Well, that's one that we'd probably keep on like a 10-year rotation. It wouldn't be something we'd shorten up because it doesn't make sense to do that, so. That's kind of where that's at, but does that muddy the water more for you, or does that help at all?
Well, I think it speaks to a bigger point, which is, I have concerns about the way that we've been doing our capital planning in the past in the county. And when we look at our shortfalls for the coming year, there was really three main categories. One was the deficits that we're projecting based on simply our current staffing plans and current needs. We have a deficit there. Then if we grant the new requests for each department, there's a whole nother bucket that goes further into the deficit. And then there's this other large category, which is capital planning needs that we are way behind on, but they haven't showed up in our budget historically. They're not necessarily showing up as deficits, but when you look at the needs and what we have today, it's just as big a drag as anything else on our budget. And so that shows that in one form or another, whether it's improper planning, improper communication, we are not sufficiently planning for the future, and the departments don't entirely know what's going on. And despite some of the logic, I mean, I'm still not convinced. I think there's a debate to be had whether you hold certain vehicles till the end of their life or whether you want to turn them. But the way this is being communicated in your budget is not helpful for managing that. Because looking at this would suggest that the cost of ownership, the total cost of the fleet, is going up dramatically. But what you're telling us is that you actually don't think the cost is going to go up this amount. Because you think by buying the newer vehicles and by trading them out sooner, you think that potentially the cost of ownership is even going to be lower.
Correct.
But it's reflected in the budget as higher. And so we need to develop a system that actually makes this an effective management tool for each of the departments to know what decisions they're making. And I appreciate what you're saying, that, okay, that's not really reflected here. It's a higher cost here, but then the vehicles are going to be sold and then the income's going to go to the other entity. That all makes sense and economic sense to me. But if you're, and we happen to be talking about your budget, but if we're talking about the county attorney's budget, it doesn't have any control over the process, this number would be confusing to them. And it wouldn't help them manage the cost of their fleet.
Makes sense.
And so I hope that we can get to the point, and I know that that's a big to-do list.
And we have had extensive discussions with the sheriff's office, since, they are the biggest user of the fleet. A lot of this has been developed in conjunction with them, and looking at how to do this and formulate it so that it makes the most sense long-term, so.
Although, my comment on that is, as much as I'm interested in looking into the way we do motor pool, I kind of feel like the relevance of these private discussions that you've been having with other providers who manage large fleets is less relevant in the sheriff's department because of all of the aftermarket parts and
Right.
everything that they have.
And we've pretty much left the patrol vehicles themselves off the table as far as like anything because of the upfit cost. But that is one of the things, they are the highest mileage vehicles in the fleet. And they are the ones that have the most upfit cost. in
Even the
fleet.
non-patrol?
No, the specific patrol.
Yeah.
You know, they're running 35, 40,000 miles a year. And so on those, if we're in that 3 to 4 year range, we're at the 120 to 160,000 mile range on those vehicles. They get a lot of use, they get a lot of hard use. We're trying to find the sweet spot there as well, like what Glenn had mentioned with that upfit cost. You know, you've got $10,000 or $15,000 of equipment that goes onto that vehicle once we purchase it, with all the lights and the cages and everything else that goes into it. There's a lot of cost that goes into those vehicles. So we don't want to have that coming around too often. We want to find wherever that sweet spot is on how long we keep those vehicles. And that's part of what we've been working with the sheriff's office on, in trying to figure out where do we start seeing the maintenance side of it tick up. You know, are we at the 80,000 mark? Are we at the 100,000 mark? Where do we see that from our fleet guys? And then where does it make the most sense to try to maximize their costs or minimize their costs, maximize their use of the vehicle so that we're getting the best bang for the buck out of those patrol vehicles. Now the non-patrol vehicles, they're a different animal. There's still some upfit costs, but they're not near as extensive as what they are on patrol. And those vehicles don't get as much use as the patrol vehicles. They're not running a 35 or 40,000 mile a year vehicle. They're more in the 15 to 20,000. So. Okay. Anything else on administration while we're there? We kind of sidetracked a little bit on the fleet, but that's okay. In our engineering division, it's also a general fund. Main thing we're looking at, there's a couple of pieces of technology equipment that we'd like to acquire for use in the engineering side of the world. First one is a drone, and you know, I know the question comes up, why do we need another drone? What we're looking at is actually one that we can do engineering analysis with. We can analyze the pavements of the trails of the roads, things like that. We can actually go out with the software that we would purchase with this and do survey work via the drone. So you could do that with one person versus a 2 or 3 man crew as we go out and do a survey on projects. Quantities, like say if we go out in the gravel pit, we need to know how many yards of material we've used out of the county pit. We can actually fly it before and after, and it'll do the volumetric calculations on what material has been removed from the site or brought into the site, whichever the case may be. Anything else on that one, Glenn? The other is a GPS rover. That's a handheld unit, GPS unit, survey unit that we can go out. One of the things that we've had an issue with over the years specifically has been culvert locations throughout the county. They get put in and they get kind of forgotten about because they're under the road, they're not seen, and nobody thinks about them until the water doesn't flow through them. And then it's a challenge to try to find where the end of it is. We'd like to actually be able to go out and survey points on the end of those so that if we do have a culvert that's plugged up, we can locate it quickly and efficiently and not destroy the culvert with the track hole when we're out there trying to unclog it. There's other features out there as well that would come into play, but that's just one example. So.
Richard, from my recollection, we had an issue with this up at Soldier Summit, right? And we contracted out with an individual who had a similar type of technology.
For the GPS rover?
Yeah. Is that?
I don't remember that. Do you, Glenn? That was the locating. Oh, that was the locating for the leaks. It was a sound.
Okay, it was a little different. Then.
Different technology, yep. Any questions on that one?
What would it cost to have somebody come in that has one of these pieces of equipment and contract with them to just go find all those culverts?
So we did look at having somebody come in and basically do the initial, we'll say, control points, and it was in the hundreds of thousands to have them help us do the initial, just because of the size of our county. And we'd still have to dedicate the personnel to go help them, show them the locations. So as we evaluated it, that's the reason. It also gives us the ability, as we add more assets, to go out and locate those in a timely fashion.
So how many coverts are you missing?
How many?
I mean, I'm sure you
we,
got.
we don't have any of them documented other than what's in my mind, Richard's mind, and Sam's. And I hate to say that, but that's the reality is there's only a select few of us that know enough about the county that we can pull up on a site. And that's, we say, well, the culvert's right there and we're within 20 feet, we hope. So that's one of the challenges.
Okay, and kind of jumping on into roads, we've talked a little bit about with B roads. We have our B road fund, approximately 2.7 million a year that comes from the state gas tax. We utilize that for anything on the roadways, from road salt, pavement, to manpower and equipment, things of that nature. We talked a little bit with some of the stormwater requirements. I want to talk about two of them that are specific to roads, our road salt storage area and our salt spreader storage areas. Because of the stormwater requirements, one of the things that we are not in compliance with is our salt loading and unloading area. We basically pull in, dump salt out on the pavement in front of the salt shed and then push it into the building. When the guys are loading, they take the loader into the building, load it up, come out and dump it into the spreader trucks. As crazy as it may sound, the rules and regulations don't allow us to have salt on the ground in our loading and unloading area as we load it up to go out and spread it on the ground. But that's one of the things that they don't like, the concentration of having the salt brine that would come off of the area. We need to have an area where any of that salt handling area, we capture all of the storm water and retain it, and don't let it run off into the storm drain systems or into the groundwater. That's one of the things that we have to look at in that salt storage area, whether that's to cover it and have everything inside, or to have containment so that we can manage it outside. Also with the salt spreader, so the spreader beds that go in the dump trucks, when they are not in use, one of the requirements is we have to have those under cover. Currently we have racks that they hang on out in the yard. They don't have any roof over them, and that's one of the things that we're gonna have to look at for to be compliant, is to have some sort of a structure over the top of those so that they're not out in the weather, causing the salt and the rust to leach off of them. So those are a couple of things that are specific to stormwater that are tied to roads. One of the things that we are also looking at with our roads crew, as we've had some attrition take place in the roads crew, and we've had a lot of our more seasoned people have retired and left the county, and we have a newer crew that's come into play. Very impressed with the guys that we've hired over the last few years. One of the things that we struggle with a little bit, especially in an economy like we have right now, is our roads guys are competing with the private sector in construction. Excuse me. In trying to keep people here, and to have a way to be able to move these guys up a little bit as they learn the equipment and become more proficient in it. Now we have, I believe it's 4 people that are equipment operator 1s. We would like to have the opportunity to be able to have those move to equipment operator 2s at the point in time that they can show proficiency on the equipment. And we would have that be done by our division manager and the road supervisor, so they can have the guys actually go through a training and testing scenario on each of the different types of equipment. And once they can show their proficiency on that, then they would be eligible to be moved up to an equipment operator 2. So that's one of the things that we're looking at with our budget request for roads. We've talked a little bit with weeds. Again,
Can I ask you a question on that? I hear 2 things. The first one is that moving people up, from a 1 to a 2, which I fundamentally just always have a hard time with on a structure, on a staffing plan structure, because it would seem to me that in your structure, the structure needs to have so many ones, so many twos, so many threes, so many supervisors, so, you know, in the structure itself. And then if there's no one of it, if it's full in two, and you've got all the twos that you need to sufficiently, perform the services, even if somebody's in one, you don't necessarily move them to a two, because you've already got that group is full. So I don't know on your staffing plan how many ones you need, how many twos, or what that structure is. When I hear we're moving people up because we're trying to give people more money, based on, I don't know, that doesn't seem to work for me.
I understand where you're going on that. I think the thing that I'm looking at on it is not necessarily that to get them the more money, that is a factor. But the way we utilize these guys, we spread them out throughout the county, and we ask them to be able to operate the grader and the track hoe and the dozer and the dump trucks and everything else. And what the functions that somebody who is an equipment operator 2 and somebody that's an equipment operator 1, the functions we ask them to do are the same. So in my mind, to have somebody that's a 2 and somebody that's a 1 doing the same job, but there's a pay differential there, that's not equitable to them. Truly the 1 positions are probably ones that we would need summertime, just the seasonal help. As we get into like chip sealing, we need flaggers and people like that. We need the manual labor, not the equipment operators, so to speak. At least that's kind of how I would look at it.
Then we have a problem in job classification.
Yes.
If job classification in 1 or 2 are exactly the same,
They're not.
Maybe clarification is, the reality is with the staff that is left in the roads department, it used to be bigger. Let's just be honest, and over time, it shrunk. I would say really what we need in the roads division is the operator 2 positions, because all these individuals are being asked in times of emergency and also during the summer to run pieces of equipment. So our desire is to have those operators capable to run the pieces of equipment, hence have them all be operator 2s technically. The operator 1 is an entry-level position, and so that was the theory is, well, a lot of times we can't compete with the market of an operator. We aren't competing, but when we do bring an individual in, a truck driver or a young individual, we're able to train them, and we'd like to be able to move them into that operator 2 position when they're eligible and qualified to participate in running that piece of equipment, and all those pieces of equipment.
but we really don't need the 1s. We want 2s.
What I would say is that we would have our staffing plan be the 2s, but we could underfill as a 1 if, you know, to bring somebody in off the street until they're qualified and then move them into that 2 position, but have the staffing plan be all at 2s. Does that make sense? Okay, and then just, you know, touching on weeds again, the B roads portion of the weeds side of the world is basically any of our roadside mowing, roadside vegetation maintenance, things like that. So there's a portion, and I couldn't tell you the 25% of weeds that would come out of our B roads, because that's the part that they're actually out on the road. So it qualifies under our B roads. The second part of roads is the new one that this is our first year really dealing with it, is our fourth quarter cent sales tax. Some of the things that we're looking at in there is our maintenance items, the asphalt, chip sealing, striping, salt, gravel. We've had items for each of those that would qualify under the fourth quarter cent rules, and also projects. Just jumping in here, this is our project list that we're looking at. Where we're looking at specific roadways. This equates to, I think, about 4.5 million, 4.8. So anticipating the use there. Some of it is local matches, some of it is paving, reconstruction on some roads. We're looking at, like on the Salem Parkway, with the time it has taken to get through all of the permitting through the Corps of Engineers, we anticipate that project not having enough money to be complete. So we're looking at having to take some of this fourth quarter money to make that project whole. And then looking also at bridges and culverts throughout the county that have need. You can see that the first column there, that the cost and the 2020 cost don't match up. The cost column there, kind of in the middle of the page, is what we anticipate the the project would cost. What we're looking at is what we would allocate in 2020 for those specific items. Questions on those?
Yeah, so on the roads and this, B roads, and I understand, you know, sometimes in the past, we don't spend all the B road money, and I don't even know if we did last year, but, did we spend all the B road? No.
No,
Um,
oh, sorry.
But what I'd like to see on the roads going forward, you have that asset works management
Mhm.
tool now.
Yep, it's in
And-
process. They're doing the implementation right now.
And so I would like to see a more detailed plan, you know, with that, you know, all the way from the CPI rankings across the county,
Mhm.
and see exactly where that, you know, where the needs are. If we're at, I guess it goes from 1 to 10, or is yours 1 to
The-
5 on
for-
that rank, the
For
rating?
the ranking, it actually
Okay.
goes from 0 to 100.
0 to 100,
Yep.
okay. I was just doing on a,
Yep.
probably a 0 to 10, but 0 to 100.
Yep.
So if you're below a 70, then, you know,
Correct.
there's certain things that have to be done, and if you're, of course, in the fail rate and you're down at the 5s or lower, then
That's
you're
where you
in
get
some
into a
serious
reconstruct
troubles.
versus like an overlay or a
Yeah.
preventative maintenance, so.
I mean, because some of these numbers are, you know, chip seal what, you know, they're just kind of numbers that are thrown in there.
Right, and we have backup to go with it as far as what roads we're looking at. I didn't give you that
And why,
detail here.
and why on
Yeah.
a ranking basis, you know, are we doing this because this falls in the category, we want to maintain this for a certain amount of years, because this one here is going to stay with us for a little bit more, so we don't get down. I'd like to see that overall.
There's kind of a two-prong approach to it. That is one of them, is trying to keep the road at a certain level so that we're not damaging it. The other thing is we look at it from a proximity standpoint. If I've got 4 roads, say in Benjamin, that I need to do because they need to be done to maintain them, but I've got 4 other roads that, you know, maybe they're not quite to that level yet, or maybe they're even beyond that level, and we need to try to buy a few years out of them. Because we can, the way our crews are set up and travel times and everything else, if I can do it all in one chunk while I'm there, we can do it for less cost than if I do a little bit in Benjamin, and then some over in Palmyra, and then some out in Alberta, and, you know, bounce around. So we do kind of look at proximity each year as well, so that that plays into the decision on where we do the roads. It's not by any means the only factor, but it is a factor.
Yeah, and plus you'll have, I mean, some of these you're gonna contract out, you're not
Oh,
gonna
yeah,
do.
absolutely.
So
We can't do all this with our
Right.
crews. Yep.
So you'll have, I mean, so the proximity matters to a certain extent.
Yep.
Not so much to others if we're contracting them out to get them done.
Again, it may be that we have 2 locations. You know, maybe we have a contract crew do it in the Benjamin area, but our crew goes out and does it in Alberta. They're doing the same type of work, but we keep the contractor in one location, we go do it in another location, so we're not moving stuff back and forth. That'll save us costs even on the contract side of it as well.
Yeah, so again, I would like to see, I mean, I see your 5-year, Public Works 5-year, you know, capital plan, but I'd like to see more of that, and which the commission
So
actually has
we can
some,
certainly give you more detail on
look into that too,
that, so.
and agrees with it.
And once we get beyond a couple of years out on the roads, at least until we get the asset works fully up and running, I don't know that I can give you a good long-term vision of it, other than in those generalities, but the first couple of years, we can give you some pretty good detail.
Okay.
Any other questions on roads? Okay, jumping into parks. Again, this is funded through TRCC. We have put in there some carryover projects that have been previously funded. Because of various things, they are not complete. Bridalveil Falls, we've talked a little bit about with that, and have some interest there in some other entities looking at doing some work up there. So we've just left that as a placeholder in there. So depending on what work we need to do from the county side of it. The Soldier Pass shooting range, we had good intentions to do a lot of work out there this year, but with the flooding aspects that have come out of the fire scars, burn scars, it has really taken a toll on our time availability for our crews. We are hoping to get back out there this fall to do some work. We've got some items that are ready to go. I think they're ready to do the final blasting, aren't they, out there, on those ranges and get things buttoned up. We have some parkway asphalt repairs. This is primarily along the Provo River Parkway and the Jordan River Parkway. Some projects there that are about ready to bid out. We'll be looking at doing the work actually in the springtime. And then also park asphalt repair, this would be the parking lots, the campsites, some of those things. We've got some needs there where we need to go in, and again, that would be asphalt work that would be bid in the spring. A couple of the other things oh, you have a question, Commissioner?
Sorry to jump back into
You're
the
good.
roads. There was that one road you're gonna look, I don't know, maybe it's on here on the plan, I can't see it anyway. The one out there, the Eagle Mountain, Saratoga Springs, that road that goes, east and west.
Yeah, it's, I know I had it on one of my lists. I think it's 8,000 north, but I don't see it on there.
Oh, 8,000 north, oh, there it is, okay, I see it.
Have I got it on there? I just don't have it on my,
Phase
on my
one's-
one on the screen. Okay,
Phase-
I think it's 8,000 north is the,
You had it on your master list, but
Okay,
it
just
wasn't on
didn't-
your PowerPoint.
okay. Maybe that's why I was missing it, so.
But I'm pretty sure on the detailed one, it was on
Now
there.
that you said I didn't know that was 8,000.
I think that's the coordinate.
But that is it, it
Yeah.
says, it has it out.
Okay. Yep, so, one of the things we are looking at in parks, we are making a request for an additional park maintenance specialist, with the parks that we have, and then also adding, out on Soldier Pass and the parkways that we're adding more distance to. We'd like to, have an additional parks maintenance person come on board. We need to do a handicap access ramp out at Willow Park for the restroom, to make it accessible for those in wheelchairs and otherwise mobility challenged. One of the projects we're looking at is doing some picnic table pads at Spanish Fork River Park. That would be concrete pads around the picnic tables, kind of the same thing. It would provide access to those instead of just being out through the gravel and the dirt. A playground at the Lincoln Beach Park. We've had some requests from patrons out there that would like to have something like that out at Lincoln Beach. So we've got an area that's laid out for the playground out there, just looking to get some funding for it. Of course, we always look for maintenance funds. Trying to keep these parks and parkways up and running is always a challenge in keeping the funds where we need it. And then the final request would be an additional truck for that additional position, because we do have our parks maintenance guys, as they go out, those crews separate and go out in various directions on any given day. We try to bring them together and carpool them as much as we can, but they're oftentimes going to do different functions at different locations, so having those vehicles available to them is a needed thing as well.
So a question on parks, what's the difference, between last year's funding, and this
Cost-wise?
year's? What's the additional dollar amount?
Jump up there, you got it.
To use my numbers here. So the additional funding for this year is $199,000. And the additional funding last year was about $2 million.
That had all the carryover projects.
And that was the carryover projects. That was the
The ones
Bridalveil,
that
the
I
Soda
put
Pass
carryover
shooting
were
range.
Was the additional
Yeah,
actions.
the first 4 items on the slideshow.
So the Provo Canyon Parkway, Vivian Park to Deer Creek, that's that Part 18 funding. That one's kind of stalled.
UDOT is still actively working on it. They've been working with some of the landowners on the Wasatch County side. They've got Horrocks Engineers has been doing the design on it. They are anticipating having their 404 permit in the springtime. So it's definitely slowed. I don't think it's stalled, but they are working on it. The project that was funded through MAG, I think, was about 1.5 million on the Utah County side of it.
Right.
The total project, which is about 1/3 in Utah County, 2/3 in Wasatch County, is about a $12 million project. So it's not fully funded, but that is something that UDOT's actually looking at trying to bring some state money into the picture as well, so.
So the trail money from MAG is a 1.5,
Correct.
plus there's a 1.5 from TRCC.
I didn't think there was additional from TRCC on that one.
It has
thought-
1.5 in here oh no, I'm
That
sorry, it
ring
is
any
part,
bells to you?
it's 18, I'm sorry,
Okay,
yeah,
I was thinking,
I
I didn't think it was
just had to look outside.
TRCC, but.
yeah. I was thinking all this was TRCC, that
Okay.
is Part 18, the 18.
And didn't that project get super expensive because there's a bend in the river that's like close to the railroad tracks and we're having
Agreed.
to
We're dealing with bridge structures and.
bridge structure and stuff over that?
Retaining walls and,
I thought.
yeah.
A lot of material to move out.
If the Heber Valley Railroad would stop at Deer Creek, it would be a really easy project. It'd be a lot more cost effective. Cause we could take the rails up and, like what we've done, that's what the trail is built on from Vivian Park down Canyon,
Right.
is the old rail bed. So if the train were to go away up Canyon, which that's the most scenic part of the ride, but that's the challenge in there, is that trying to fit between the railroad and the river and the highway, and that's part of why UDOT's also looking at bringing some money to the table to try to get that funded through both counties, connect what's already built in Wasatch County to what's already built in Utah County. Other questions on parks? Okay, we'll jump over into telecommunications. That's our radio and telephone internal service fund. The telephone system upgrade, that's, and I just threw this in just for information purposes, that's funded in this year's budget. It is currently being worked on and anticipating right now we should be operational mid-November, end of November. So they are actively working on getting all of that done, doing the behind-the-scenes work right now. You haven't seen the work out on the desktops. They're getting all of the backroom stuff done, so that when they get ready to put the new handset on the table, it's just plug and play at that point. But there's a lot of work that has to happen on the back side of it to have that ready to go, and that's what our guys have been working on with the contractors over the last little bit.
One other thing that you'll see is, we had to work out a new agreement with Verizon to do some of the networking of the system. That contract should come before you. We finally got that worked out. Should come here in the next week before the commission, so.
On our radio replacements, that's, you've got two different internal service funds for telecommunications, one's for radio, one's for telephone. The radio replacements, we do have an ongoing need to try to stay current on the radios. We have a fairly sizable investment in radio infrastructure in the county, primarily in the sheriff's office, public safety side of it. There are some in attorneys and some in public works that we have radios with as well. We also have our mountaintop radio sites that are kind of the backbone of that system, that provides us the interoperability. And again, this is primarily on the public safety side of it, but they need to be able to, Utah County Sheriff needs to be able to talk to Provo City Police, or vice versa, or Utah County Sheriff needs to be able to talk to San Pete County Sheriff on the radio. So there's a lot of moving parts and far more technical knowledge there than I have, but our radio guys work on all of that, keep everything up and running, so that when they talk on the radios, they can talk to who they need to talk to and provide the coverage throughout the county. We have a few spots, just because of topography, that we don't have radio coverage, but those are very few. Those are it's in some of our canyon areas where we have holes in coverage, but for the most part, we can cover the entire county with radio coverage. Our fiber optic system, a couple of things there just to look at. That's part of our network that goes between all of our buildings. It also ties the dispatch centers together, so that we have redundancy on the dispatch centers between, not Valley now, what's it called now? Central? Is that what they call it now? Yeah. Used to be Valley Dispatch. Anyway, between Central and Springville and Provo, so that they can operate as redundant systems, providing that. A couple of items that we have on projects for the fiber optic system. There's an overhead power line here on 700 East in Provo where we have fiber on the poles. That is a project Provo City Power is looking at doing this next year. We'll need to do some work on there. We've included that. And then also the BRT fiber connection. We talked a little bit about that with the possible Novell building connection. We would need to connect this building out to the street out here in front, so that our current system is tied to that new fiber that went in the ground with the BRT system. That's a project we've got in here as well. And then just needing to keep the system up to date with the technology in the phone room side of it. Also, we have our microwave infrastructure that's part of our radio system. We do have an aging system there that's mostly on our mountaintop sites. We do have a site at the jail, and I think we have one that's up on Kimball Tower at BYU, don't we? That's one part of our microwave network. There is a need in the coming years to modernize the microwave system. So that is something that's being looked at as part of our planning for the future. And then also with some training, we are looking at some training for the crew in telecommunications. It's a fairly small crew. That's only 3 people. And I don't remember the details on the training on. But yeah, 2 of them to go to fiber optic training. The division manager he was a cabling specialist before he was the division manager. The other 2, I don't really have the background in fiber optics, so it would provide them some training to be able to be up to speed on that. Any questions on telecommunications, either radio or telephone? Okay, jumping into fleet services, we've talked a little bit about about fleet already. One of the things that I want to bring to your attention is our Provo fuel site. I've had a little bit of a conversation with Commissioner Ivy on this. The Provo fuel site is about 30 years old, a little over 30 years old. And the system in the ground needs to be replaced. We have the oldest still fuel tanks in the state, and we are on the state's radar for having those old tanks. Fortunately, we have not had any leaks, but we are probably on borrowed time with those fuel tanks. We're to the point that we either need to take the fuel site out, which is a cost of about $200,000, or replace the fuel site at our public works site at about $500,000. And as I mentioned, I talked with Commissioner Ivy a couple of weeks ago. He threw out the idea of we've got the site down in Spanish Fork at the jail. Maybe we go in and upgrade that site and decommission the one here in Provo and just operate one site. And we're looking into some costs on that. I don't have those for you today, but we are looking at what that cost differential would be if we were to go in and upgrade. You know, if we can do it for under the $300,000 difference in decommissioning and upgrading the Provo site, it probably makes sense to just go to one site, then we only have one to maintain, and do that and kind of consolidate that into one area.
Above ground or below?
What's that?
Above or below?
Right now, they're all below. That's one of the,
If you just did the one site, would it be, you just keep it below?
possibly. We've got ground that we could do that, but we're also exploring what it would take, even if we'd looked at above ground tanks. One of the challenges down at Spanish Fork is the groundwater level. So we have to keep a certain amount of fuel in the tanks to keep them from floating and popping out of the ground. So that's, if we could do it with an above ground system, that might be a better way to go down there if we're gonna expand that site. So that's part of what we're looking at the costs on down there, so.
Via our conversation, to me, that made the most sense to try and look at that, because we've got a mess here that's gonna cost us a bunch of money.
And we do need to decommission it so that we don't have the county have the liability for those tanks being in the ground, even if they're not in use anymore. So we would have some cost either way on the Provo site, but that's kind of the way we're leaning, so. You know, on fleet, one of our big wild cards that we have every year is fuel costs. If your crystal ball is better than mine on what fuel is gonna do over the next year, please share it, because we try to go off what our actuals have been in years past and try to project where that's gonna be, but that is kind of a wild card for us because we don't know what fuel is gonna do over the next year. But Gina, what was our dollar amount we put in for this year? 700,000? Okay. So, any other things you'd want to talk about on fleet? I know we kind of talked a little bit about it, kind of in general before, but.
Yeah, let's see, are you saying fleet, motor pool?
Yes, fleet and motor pool would be the same, so.
So I would like, at least for my benefit, if you'd go through an analysis with the fleet and find some reduction in the fleet.
Okay.
There's vehicles in there. There's two areas of concern for me. First one is there's vehicles in there that are used very little. And I want to know why, because it might be that maybe they could share a vehicle or whatever the case, or like Commissioner Ivy mentioned, maybe if they were to use their own for that little bit of time. And then also, according to our policies that we have in the county, look to see who needs a vehicle, who doesn't need a vehicle, and why. I would like to see a reduction, a significant reduction in the fleet. And we had an auditor's alert that came out, I don't know when it was, that talked about the IRS, if you're using vehicles for traveling back and forth, for commuter, back, for your work, that you should be charged for that, and also look at, that should be, at least you should be paying the cost of
I
that.
think that's always been the case on a take-home vehicle, I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah, and then unmarked vehicles, if the vehicles are not marked or not marked
So you would like us to
appropriately.
look fleet-wide, not just our department-wide?
Yeah,
Is that-
fleet-wide,
okay.
fleet-wide on there.
I'm taking notes on this, Gina.
And,
Thank you.
and see where we're at on a fleet maintenance, basis, where, what you'd like, what you see out there. Cause I think there's some reductions that can be made. It seems a little bit wide open right now,
Mhm.
and I'd like to see them tightened up.
And there are some, and I kind of mentioned one before, like with the bucket truck, it is a low-use vehicle. It's not necessarily assigned to any individual.
Right.
But it's one of the specialized ones that it shows up in our fleet numbers, but it's not a heavy use. You don't see a lot of miles on it, but that's, and I think that's part of what you're looking at is, if we have something like that, why do we have it, and what's the
Yeah,
reason behind it? Is that,
And I
am
get it
following you?
when I was going down through some analysis with it, there was a couple vehicles in there that didn't make any sense at all. And then when we found out what they were used for, it made total sense, right? So,
And if you have specifics like that you'd like us to look at, please shoot them to me and let me know, so we can make sure we address the ones that are a concern to you as well. That we don't miss those in the analysis, we'll take a look at that, so.
okay.
I think I agree that that's a fair exercise. When you look at, there's some no-brainers, obviously patrol vehicles and other things like that. And then when you start to go further down the list on the non-patrol vehicles, at least when it's the first time that you've gone through it, it doesn't necessarily, and maybe there's some education that you can provide, match up with expectations. Because there's certain departments that do a lot and they don't have the vehicle, and then there's other departments you say, oh, why does that position have a vehicle? Why is that not just a mileage reimbursement? And it's hard to connect those dots. In some cases, the majority of the fleet is enforcement
Right.
and patrol, and obviously that makes a lot of sense. Then there's a lot of the fleet that's public works, and it's snow removal and all sorts of, those are the obvious ones. But the non-marked other vehicles, it would be helpful to understand why.
And we'll have to get with the other departments as well on this, because from our perspective, we don't necessarily know who's using it, why they're using it, what their background is, why they need what they have. We simply provide what they have asked for and what they have in their budget, so.
And
So if that's the case, to me, that answer does not give me a lot of comfort, and I'm even more thrilled that we're gonna do this analysis.
And let me qualify that just a little bit. So as the department says, I need vehicle number X here, and I'll just throw something out here. I need an F-350, 4-door diesel, all the bells and whistles on it. And we say, okay, here's the cost. Then they come back to you in their budget request and say, okay, I need an F-350, blah, blah, blah. And if the commission, you or previous ones approve it, then it comes back to us with a PO and we go and buy the truck.
Sure, but that could have happened, taking that example, that could have happened 12 years ago,
Oh, absolutely,
and then that's on a recap replacement.
absolutely.
And so now
Yes.
we don't really have any insight into that.
I would bet that most of, the additional vehicles that come into play are like that. There are some that I know that are in the sheriff's office that have been purchased through grant funds. And Gina and Deneen, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe those go on to a recap if they're grant funded. Is that correct?
It's if the department asks for
Okay.
it or
So
doesn't, so
it's-
it's up to them.
Specific by a vehicle?
Right.
But I know there's been some we've purchased new vehicles specifically in the sheriff's office. This has been a few years back, but they said, no, we don't want them on a recap, and then we get down the road 5-6 years, we need to replace the vehicle, there's no recap.
Yeah.
But, then it's now in the fleet, and they're looking for ways to do that, so. And that's been a few years back, that's not with the current sheriff's office administration, so.
Can you also, I don't know if we have anything in our policies that talk about, the signage, you know, on our vehicles? What constitutes a sign? I mean, if you had just a little tiny thing on the side of, you know, on the front or the back or on the door, is it a certain
I don't know
signage
that-
that says that's a marked county vehicle?
I don't know that we have anything in the county policy on it. I believe there is a state law that gives you some requirements if you have an EX plate, that it has to have markings on it and has some dimensions. It doesn't have to be a large one to qualify for that. If we have something that's like say an undercover vehicle in the
Yeah,
sheriff's
yeah,
office.
no,
Yeah, I don't,
Yeah.
I know there's different rules for police vehicles versus normal government vehicles, for lack of a better term. But we have, you know, there is a requirement to have, if you have an EX plate on there, to have a marking identifying what entity it's part of.
Yeah, I'm just trying to alleviate, you know, in a business standpoint, you want everyone to see your logo and see what's going on and see, you know, exactly who you are going down the road, to, you know, wrapping vehicles to where it's everywhere.
Yeah.
To, maybe an executive level where it's a little bit smaller, it's not quite the same, but it still needs to be known at a certain level so that it's not necessarily looking like a private vehicle driving
Right.
around the road.
Right.
And then last, would you coordinate with Ralph also from HR? Because I have asked him to go down through on a job description level.
Okay.
Because on a job description, in their job descriptions, it will say, you know, they need to travel or they need to do whatever. And so match those up with vehicles that are assigned.
Yep, we can do our best on that, so.
And I support what Commissioner Lee's doing, and even on that, there's a need question, but then there's still the analysis of what is more cost-effective, a reimbursement
Yeah, right.
or a vehicle.
And you know, and my pain point in this is, in looking down through I think we're deficient, and I think we have some liability out there that is, and I'm working with HR on it, and that is that our policies, what happened with Pleasant Grove and that one vehicle, in which they were driving that, you know, that's huge, and I worry on a liability basis that if we don't have in their job description, they have a vehicle, we don't have a policy that covers us, in which they sign off on it and say, you know, I'm not using it personal, I'm on call, and so I'm taking it home because I'm on call.
Correct.
Or whatever, and if we don't know exactly what's going on there, we're just.
I know we do
hanging
have
out
a policy, and we can pull it out and provide it for you, that was adopted many years ago on-call vehicles specifically. You know, what their rules and regs are that they do it. They drive it to and from, you know, the call out, but it's not to be used for any personal use. They can't have family members in it, things like that, so.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, jumping on into buildings and grounds, this one is also a internal service fund. Couple of the things that we're requesting there is this an additional one or changing? So, we have a security electronics specialist 2, that and I think we have 2 of them, right? We have a 1 and a 2. We want to take the 2 to a 3, and the 1 to a 2. So we basically want to move them up to additional activities that they do within their jobs, and additional requirements is the word I'm coming up with, but it's not the word I'm thinking. Yeah, we have additional responsibilities, that's the word I was looking for, that they will be taking on with and these 2 gentlemen work down at the jail in the buildings and grounds side of it, but they are the ones that maintain all of the electronic control systems in the jail. So that's why you see security electronics, it's specific to there. They do help out with some other electronics in the other buildings, but their primary functions are down there. There are some additional systems that are coming online that require more skill and expertise from these positions. So we are looking at making that change. I guess I should have put on here 2 different ones, one for security electronics 3 and a 2, taking the current ones that are a 1 and a 2 and changing their responsibilities. So that's kind of where that at. Projects by building. This is part of our on our a list, what we do is we try to go through and look at all of the different buildings, decide what needs to happen with them to keep them up to standard and keep them in good operating condition. We have talked, at least in preliminary discussions, about the admin building and the downtown campus remodel. Some of that is starting to take place with some of the moves we're doing now. We need to get the big picture of how extensive we want to go and what our time frame is to do that. There's some significant costs that are associated with it, and trying to make it so we only have to do the remodel one time and not do work that we wind up tearing out in a short amount of time, just to be more cost effective for us. We've talked already about some of the stormwater compliance issues out at the Public Works site. One of the big ones down at the jail is the EFS, that's the stucco on the outside of the building. We did a project down there 3 or 4 years ago that basically did half of the building and redoing it. This would be basically the other half of the building. The systems on the outside of the building, they're about 28 years old now. And we've got some areas where they are starting to fail, and trying to get it so we don't get moisture inside in the structure and causes problems inside the structure. So that's one of the big ones down there. I do have, I don't know if you can see that very well. I guess you can read a little of it. This kind of breaks down the different projects by building and the cost that goes along with those. These are the ones that we've proposed in our buildings budget for this year by building. So if there's any of those that you have questions on, we can certainly talk about those.
Do I have a copy of that? One?
Should be what was emailed to you.
Okay.
I think, is that the one that you emailed the other day after
Oh,
you and
the
I
other day?
talked?
Oh, okay, okay.
So-
I'm looking after the,
Yeah, so that's,
I haven't looked down through this one yet.
and then it
So
should
the-
also be
the-
in this packet that I left up there as well, so.
In the back of this, okay. Oh, it's in here?
It should be in that, it's
Perfect.
just one of the slides
Thank
in
you.
there, so it should be in there, and then you should have an email with it as well.
I just haven't updated my folder.
Oh, you're okay.
So on the,
We just keep throwing information at you, so.
on, have you talked with the attorney's office on their upgrade?
Not in the last few days.
They had like
The-
$1.1 million in the way of, that's not gonna happen. So-
That's yeah, I sent you, the three of you and David Levitt, the cost estimates on like 3 different scenarios. And I'm just waiting for instruction on which way
Well,
you want
with
us to proceed.
with David Levitt, that 1.1's it's not gonna go to that extreme.
I haven't had any feedback on that
He
I sent
agrees.
before, so. We're just waiting for instruction. So, guess the last thing we have just, does the
Oh, on
last.
it, can we,
Sure.
on internal service, I know and thank you for that email,
Mhm.
clarifying some things on there. Would you look at how, and I get it, there's some things that are not subjective, there are things that are pretty built in and baked in when we're talking about internal service. But I see a significant jumps in the internal service fund. Would you go through an analysis of if we held internal service funds at the 2018 level, what that would mean?
Yeah, we can look at that and see what it is. There's, a couple of different things on there.
Actuals, 2018 actuals.
We
Well,
have
it's
to-
actually higher than the 2020 in progress.
2018?
2018 actuals is higher.
I'm countywide. Countywide, so for instance, if you look at,
You want the 2018 actuals, or do you want the
Internal.
2019 projected? Which number am I, are we on that?
what do you suggest, Deneen, on that?
Just so we know which number we're looking at.
Currently, the 2020 budget for buildings and maintenance, for taking out capital outlay, is lower in 2020 than it was 2018 actually.
Yeah, so maybe that one might be an easier one. I'm just looking at like the sheriff's department where you're at $8 or $9 million versus 6. I can't remember what the numbers were for sure on there, but on a
Couple of-
countywide basis.
Couple of things that and this is internal service funds in general, so you've got fleet, you've got radio, you've got telephone, and buildings, and IT. I think those are that all the internal service funds? So-
Kitchen.
Kitchen, okay. So the kitchen and IT, we have nothing to do with. So the other four, we've talked about buildings right here, and you can see what the projects are. Really, the project side of it is where we have some latitude in the buildings budget. The rest of it is that's your maintenance costs, your utility costs, things like that. Before we start saying, okay, well, we don't want to do the 2 boilers this year, or we don't want to do the pressure valves, I would want to have a conversation with Brady and his team, say, okay, which of these, basically rank them out, say which are critical, which are not. So we can have a discussion that way that on what the needs are. On telephone, it should have stayed the same. Radios, because of the way we're doing the recap for the radios to try to make it so that there's money in there to replace the radios as they need to be replaced. That did have a change, and that was a discussion with the sheriff's office as we were preparing that to make sure they were comfortable with it. And then we've already talked about the change in the scenario on fleet, on the replacement and the recap. So that's had that same effect in the sheriff's office budget as well. So, and those internal service fund changes, that's where you're seeing those changes, is on the vehicles with the recap being higher, with the radio having the recap in there on the radio. So there is a replacement fund to do those as they come about, and then with the buildings projects.
So I, on the internal service, this is countywide, not specific, because you're gonna have these kind of
Right,
ups and
yeah.
downs. And we had that conversation on the ups and downs versus the
Correct.
flat.
Yep.
In 2019, you had 12,847,905, and that's those are not actuals. So that's the reason why I say
Right.
2018, because it gives us more actuals. But in 2020, our projected is 15,463,839. So there's a 20% increase.
And we can certainly look at that.
And so I'd just like to, I'd like to see,
Yeah,
you
we
know,
can-
go through that exercise of seeing
Sure.
where that's at. And if we were to hold, let's just say that 20% was the 20% that we're looking at. If we held on that 20%, what does that look like for the county?
Okay.
What does that do?
Yeah, we can do that and give you an answer on that, so,
Thank you.
okay.
So I have the opposite concern,
Okay,
which is probably about what you're getting to, is, for me, we need to be as frugal as we possibly can in our operations budgets.
absolutely.
But we're shooting ourselves in the foot if we let capital
Because we
projects.
put things off and then it
So-
hurts us later.
Let me ask a little bit of a pointed question to you then, which is, all year long, we've been dealing with the fact that we have constraints from an office standpoint.
Mhm.
The department's literally saying we cannot perform our most basic functions. We do not have any space.
Mhm.
We have some failures. You're referencing some issues where we have environmental problems, we
Correct.
have lack of compliance.
Correct.
So in a deficit year where we're already trying to fill a gap, now you come and you say, we have no space and there's some major renovations that need to be done
Mhm.
and we're out of compliance with. How did we get to that point? Why did we let it get to this point before we took any action?
I'll be frank right back to you. We've presented it for the last several years to various different commissions, and each time we have not been funded. And so without the funding, we can't go out and do the work. So if I don't have the means to go do it, there's nothing I can do about it. I can ask for the money, but if I don't get it, then I can't go build new buildings with no additional funding. I can't get the compliance issues taken care of with no additional funding. We've done our best we can with what monies we've had available. There are things that we have been able to Band-Aid together, for lack of a better term, to try to make it work with the funds that we've got, so that we're not further behind. But it comes down to that we have not been able to have the adequate funding to do everything that's needed to be done, even though we have requested it.
And that may be fair, but for me, if that's the case, if it's simply that you have demanded the funding and you've,
I can't demand anything.
well,
so-
here's what I'll say is, I think that it's irresponsible to not fund projects that have to be done.
Mhm.
I mean, we have environmental and safety concerns. That's something that we need to take care of. And my expectation is that department heads, like you're doing today, say that. And when a commission says, well, can't we do without? The answer is, well, we have significant safety and environmental issues.
And what we,
If
what
we
we try
don't.
to do on a situation like what Commissioner Lee just asked is we try to give you the analysis, say, okay, here's what would happen if we reduce it by 20%, here's the ramifications. That's what we typically try to do when we get this type of a request is here, we give you the information, here's what happens if we do, here's what happens if we don't. It can be somewhere in between. And, you know, we're certainly happy to counsel with you on it, to give you advice from our perspective. You know, we're here as advisors to the commission.
Yeah.
That's what our role is. And then, once you guys make the decisions on what you wanna fund and how you wanna fund it, we go do our best to try to make that happen, so.
Okay, thank you.
Can I?
Go ahead.
I just wanted to simply state the way that I'm looking at the numbers is the 2018 actuals included some level of projects that were done. So if I look at just the jail, it's 104 cost center, the non-personnel numbers, which would include utilities and projects expenses, were $1.2 million. That's 2018 actuals. The same number for 2020 is $1.3 million. So there's an additional $100,000 in projects. But the jail's rent went up $2 million. Like, I would have only expected it to go up $100,000.
Okay,
So I think
so-
that's
so-
what
You want-
that's what doesn't make a lot of sense to me, just looking at the numbers.
Sure, and I didn't provide the commission this was something that I was gonna talk with you about, Deneen, is that I took the 2016 actuals, 2017 actuals, and 2018 actuals, and I did a weighted average to project for 2020 actuals. Does that make sense? Remember how you and I had talked about we need to be budgeting for actuals based on historical evidence? So I took all 3 years that you provided me, and I did a weighted average across all 3 years. So I didn't just say 2018's was this, so now going into 2020, that's the one we're gonna use. Does that make sense?
What I
So I did
remember
a weighted
seeing
average.
was looking at a square footage rate, and then the projects were added into that to come up with an additional total, which that
Correct.
would be double counting the projects because there were already projects included in the square footage rate.
The problem is that I don't know specifically, we didn't look at, okay, Brady put in $1.2 million of projects in 2018 versus 850,000 in 2020. We didn't look at that specifically. So you're correct in your analysis that I would say there could be a portion that may have been double counted, or there could be a portion we didn't account for depending on how many projects he projected during that 3-year period. Does that make sense? So what I probably should do is do an analysis of what was for projects in 2016, 2017, and 2018, then average that and say, okay, does that cover the projects, the $805,000 worth of projects that he's projecting for 2020? And if he is, then yes, we're covered. And if he's not, how much of a difference is there, and then account for that.
Yeah, or alternatively, what I would say is that you should take what the actual expenses are and just divide it by the square footage of the building, and that becomes your square footage rate rather than relying on the historical data.
Okay, we can do that as well.
But that's probably where I would look at is like the building revenue compared to the building expenses, because that's the one that like just, it was pretty glaring when we went over the sheriff's because it was such an increase, and I can only account for $100,000 increase, but the rent's up $2
What
million.
we can do on that as we get going into this analysis, would you be willing to
Sure.
sit down with us and help us with, you know?
Yeah.
So if there's things like that that you're seeing that maybe we're missing on it, that we can
Right.
pull those together and
Yeah,
try to
I'm happy to.
install that stuff. Okay,
I'm gonna
Sure.
ask a couple more questions
Sure.
as I look at the line items here in your building maintenance account. There's a line item called building and grounds, 2,600. And it's about a $980,000 account. And I'm just curious what is in that account.
Basically everything. So anytime a toilet breaks and you need a part for the toilet, it comes out of 2,600. Fertilizer for the grounds outside, flowers. So no utilities or no projects come out of that. It's just the everyday
all your supplies.
supplies, also your custodial contract, elevators, just to name a few things. Does that make sense? It's kind of I call it the maintenance account because that's where everything's really functioning off of that money,
Okay?
other than your utilities.
Can I also add some
Yes, go
clarification to that? There are some one-time projects that are in that account, because what you're looking at is why did it go up and then why is it back down, probably. And so there's projects like carpet repairs that they do one time, or parking lot repairs that you're gonna have in 1 year that you probably aren't gonna have ongoing.
Yeah,
And
like
then-
the fix of this room, right? What, 2 years ago, we put the
Right.
cameras and new
Correct.
countertop and stuff in here that would have been a one-time.
And those projects that were up on the screen a slide ago, those are actually budgeted in the 7310 account. So that's probably why that account is different. I'm just trying to look at those. Some of those I would have assumed would have been budgeted in the 2600 account, but that's probably the reason for the difference. If you had that 400,000 in the 2600 account, it would be consistent with the 2019 budget.
And the reason we separated out is for clarity, for the commission to clearly see what projects we were looking at, so that if there's a discussion of priority, then we can go through and easily identify for cutting.
Can Deneen or Richard or anyone, can we walk through just those 4 accounts that are in the capital outlay section and just describe what's happening there?
Where are you looking at?
7310, 7410, 9100, 9800.
So 7310 is capitalized building projects. Based upon the description of capital projects, the only one that I would see that would qualify for that would be the engineering cost, because a capital project we define as $100,000 or more. So I think, like Gina mentioned, probably for clarity's sake, they separated those out, but most of those would just fall on regular building maintenance. The 7410 is a piece of equipment that would be purchased that has a unit cost of $5,000 or more, single piece of equipment. And then 7420 is for lower dollar item, inventoriable items, so like their monitors that they use for the security, at the security system, that's gonna be a 7420. And then your 7470 is computer equipment, and it's gonna be lower dollar items too.
The building improvements then is supposed to encapsulate the major projects for the year, a roof replacement, a major renovation.
Right.
And is this a, I guess I'm a little bit confused in terms of, how does this line item, this 7310, correlate with our long-term capital projects plan?
Right, so any project, 7310 would be a capital building improvement, which by definition of our policy is a cost of $100,000 or more. So any of the projects that would meet that definition would be discussed and then put on our long-range 10-year replacement value. I should also mention that because it would be a capitalized project and it's an internal service fund, which is treated more like standard business accounting, as that becomes an asset then that is depreciated over the life instead of expensed in the year that it's constructed or remodeled or purchased or whatever.
And so that's the question, is the building improvement plan, what part of our 5-year long-term capital plan shows up as an expense item here in 7310?
So I would say that there's probably 2 components, which is the projects that have an individual cost of $100,000 or more could be in here directly, like you're seeing up
Directly,
there.
not just the capital, not just the portion of depreciation that year, the full cost of that
Right,
project.
because we have to have the budget for the full cost of it. And the second way that a building project, I think, would be part of the capital projects plan is there could be a situation I could see where it's paid directly from the capital projects plan. Maybe it's a larger type project, maybe several $1,000,000, that we wouldn't want to say, oh, we're gonna charge out a whole $1,000,000 to a department during that year. We might say we're gonna carry that over 4 years. So we charge it out, or we pay for it out of the capital projects budget, and then do a transfer from the building maintenance fund to the capital projects over like a 4-year, 5-year, however, whatever amortization period that is. So that's the 2 ways I could see the buildings budget being impacted.
As you can tell, where I'm getting held up is, you were saying that it's an asset and not necessarily expense, similar to business accounting.
Right.
Where in business accounting, if we were going to make a significant investment in a year, that would not flow through as an expense in the financial statements.
Right. It wouldn't flow through in as an expense, but they still had a cash outlay. So we can't also end up with a negative cash balance.
Sure.
So that's why we have to have funding to cover the cash.
Okay.
I'm glad you're answering the accounting questions. Capital projects, we've talked a little bit about that. We've provided you a spreadsheet that has what we're anticipating, kind of looking out that 5-year mark. Granted, when we get out past, year 3, 4, 5, they are more general. So, and I think with the new policies that were adopted here a few weeks ago, I think that actually extends that look ahead out longer, does it not, Deneen? With that, the policy that was adopted by the commission,
10 years.
10 years,
Right.
yeah. So we've typically done this 5 years, so we've not looked out at that 10-year mark yet, but we are working towards that, so that is something that we do try to do. Some of it's just crystal ball type stuff. We're trying to give you our best guess as to what we think will happen further out for some of those large ticket items, and go from there, so. Any other questions you have for any of us?
So in this budget, we don't have right now, I mean, there's stuff that's long-term. I guess this is my continued concern. Long-term, we need to make sure we're taken care of.
Mhm.
But even in the short term, I mean, there's 2 planned renovations. One for the county attorney's office, which is essentially underway,
Mhm.
correct? And then the clerk auditor's office.
Yep.
So maybe the county attorneys, that we're thinking that might be done before the end of this year, so we're using some existing funding. But I don't know, what's our plan? Where does this show up? The clerk auditor's renovation and the county attorney's renovation, where are those showing up in this budget that we just looked at?
They would not show up in our budget because it was something that would be funded by the individual departments. That's not part of what's included in their building lease. So as they want to do renovations, that's an expense that comes out of their budget. So they would have to show up in their individual budgets for that, and then there's a appeal to the treasurer, then that brings the money into the building fund so they can actually go do the work. So in our budget specifically, it doesn't show up, so.
So we're counting in both cases, those flowing through the individual budgets of the departments? Which I don't believe we saw line items in either case.
I don't believe we've been asked to provide any cost estimates for the auditor's office. I shared with you what we had on the attorney's office, the former commission suite. So that's all that
And
we
with them
have.
being newly elected, that might be a point of clarification. I wonder if they are anticipating that Public Works handles that.
Because I do
Could be.
remember I do think that the space, the additional square footage was allocated in their budget for
Mhm.
2020. So I think that they felt like they were contemplating the cost of that new space inclusive of the renovation.
And the renovation is not included. Okay. If there's no other questions, that's all we've got. Ready, unless you guys have anything else you want to add? Okay,
All right, thank you.
thanks.
Early.
We talked quick.
Well done.